this video we'll be assembling EcoCAD's SuperCAP electric car kit. This car kit consists of connector cable, front wheel hardware, circuit board along with the circuit board mounting hardware, the wheel sets, gearbox assembly, and the acrylic. What you'll also need is a Phillips head screwdriver and safety glasses that should be worn at all times during assembly and experiments with the SuperCAP electric car. This video should also be accompanied with a PDF online instruction manual. Please read the instruction manual fully before assembling the SuperCAP electric car. Before beginning assembly, remove all the paper backings from the acrylic parts. This paper serves as a protective coating to keep any extra debris and scratches from the plastic. In this step, we'll be assembling the wheel sets. In the package, you'll find 2 frames with the wheels and hubs, the tires, and 4 sets of screws. You will also need a Phillips head screwdriver to assemble the hubs to the wheels. Start by detaching the hubs and the wheels from the white frames. Next, remove the black rubber support from the tires. Be sure to take all the remaining excess rubber from the tires. Now that you have your wheels and tires ready, begin by assembling the hub to the wheels. You will notice there's a small tabs that these should interlock with. With your screws, install the hub to the wheel. Now, this is the same way for the smaller wheels. Be sure to place the small tab into the small hole. And then repeat with the 2 remaining hubs and wheels. Now that you've attached your wheels and hubs together, you can now install the rubber tires. Place the rubber tires next to the rim of the wheel and with slight force fit it over the rim of the wheel. Do this all the way around, and it should seat properly between the 2 tabs. The same for the small wheels. And that finishes this step. In this step, we'll be installing the front axle. In your front wheel hardware bag, you'll find the front axle, 2 machine screws, 2 angle brackets, and a front center support. You'll also need the car's chassis and the 2 front wheels from the last step. Also, a Phillips head screwdriver. We'll begin by attaching the center support to the chassis. First, find the 2 holes in the front of the chassis. Align the matching holes from the spacer to the chassis. From beneath, install a machine screw through the holes, and with your angle bracket, use the threaded side to thread onto the screw. Finger tight at first is fine. We'll come back and screw that in with the screwdriver. Now, we want to make sure to align the holes opposing each other, because the center axle will be going through that. So now you can tighten down the angle brackets. And that's how it should look. The next step is to take your center axle, the smaller version, and insert it into the small wheel, and place it through the bracket holes. And with the other wheel, attach that and press firmly for it to fit. Now you should have a little bit of space in between, so that way they don't lock up. In this step, we'll be assembling the gearbox onto the chassis. First, we'll be assembling the gearbox to the chassis, and then setting the gear ratios. In your hardware bag, you'll receive the gearbox mounting tabs, the mounting hardware, the final gear, the stopper and set screw with a wrench, eyelets. You'll receive 4, but you only need 2. You have 2 extras, and the large shaft. Also, you'll need your large rear wheels. You'll also need a Phillips head screwdriver. To mount the gearbox to the chassis, we'll begin by inserting the gearbox tabs into the lower portion of the gearbox. The gearbox tab should be flush on the bottom. On the chassis, locate the 2 mounting holes to the rear of the chassis. Align the gearbox mounting tabs with those holes. Go ahead and flip over the chassis with the gearbox, and take your machine screw and thread it through the bottom, through the gearbox tabs. Put your thumb on the machine screw. Go ahead and take a nut and thread it onto that screw. This doesn't need to be too tight at first. We'll come back and tighten them down. Do the same on the other side. Hold the screw head from the bottom. Take a nut. Thread it onto the top. Oops. Alrighty. Go ahead and tighten those down. And not too tight at first, because we're going to check the alignment of the motor with the chassis. Now just make sure the chassis is aligned, or the gearbox is aligned with the chassis. If it looks straight, go ahead and firmly tighten down on the gearbox to the chassis. Not too tight, but firm enough. And it should look like this. In this step, you'll be shown how to set gear ratio, install the center axle, and install the rear wheels. For this, you'll need your eyelets, large shaft, final gear, stopper with set screw and hex wrench, rear wheels, and your chassis body with the gearbox assembled. To set the 71.4:1 gear ratio, insert the eyelets into the rear positioning of the gearbox. From with the center of the gearbox, insert the eyelets into the rear position. The next step will install the stopper. First, take your hex wrench and set screw and install the set screw on the end of the wrench. Then, thread the set screw 1 to 2 turns into the stopper. Then, place it in the far right corner of the gearbox. Next, take the final gear and insert it into the 71.4:1 gear ratio slot. This slot is in the 4th position, closest to the stopper. Next, take your hex shaft and insert it through the eyelets, through the stopper, and through the final gear. Make sure it's centered from the chassis center line. Then, take your hex wrench and tighten the set screw on the stopper. Once the shaft is firmly in place, you can now install the rear wheels. Place one on one side and firmly press it on, and do the same for the other side. Check the alignment of the wheels. If it looks like it's going to come in contact with the chassis, you can loosen up the set screw and center the wheel, or loosen the mounting screw from beneath to adjust the gearbox.